a simple act of placing our tongue correctly at the roof of our mouth will change our anatomy, but it'll also change our physiology, and it'll support our immune system, because our immune system actually starts in our nose. We breathe about 30 pounds of air a day. So if you think about that, there's more molecules of oxygen that we breathe per day than there are stars that we've identified in the universe.
Wow.
In fact, with every breath we take, there is more molecules of oxygen than there are grains of sand on the planet. Wow. So there's an entire universe of exchange that's taking place with each breath that we take. And so because we breathe 23,000 times a day and 30 liters a day, just by simply changing how we breathe and whether we breathe through our mouth or nose can have a profound impact on our health.
Good morning and welcome to the Fusionary Health podcast. I'm Dr. Shivani Gupta, and this is the podcast dedicating to recalibrating your health every day. My goal is to help you wake up each day energized by addressing root causes and giving you new approaches to preventive health. The more we know about integrative health, the more empowered we are in building the vibrant health we want.
Welcome to the Fusionary Health podcast. So I have a very special guest for you today, Sachin Patel, who's here to share with us about breathing, breath work, sleep, and really optimizing our health in a new way. He has created the Living Proof Institute for health optimization. And then he also has a whole business around coaching practitioners on creating practices that help them optimize their reach and their impact on their patients. So welcome, Sachin.
Thank you. I'm so excited for our conversation today, and I appreciate your graciousness in hosting me.
For sure. So I got to meet you. I felt like I had seen you in all the cool events with all the cool people who I know. And then I got to experience what you do. I got to meet you at a conference where you led us through this breathwork experience that was transformative. And I thought, gosh, we forget the basics when it comes to health. We get so focused on I want an infrared sauna and I want this and that to transform things. And we forget the simple things. And I really love from watching you online how you keep reminding us the simplest building blocks of health are the ones that matter. And so will you share your journey of what led you to get here? Because I know you have so much wisdom when it comes to breath work, sleep tactics we can use and things like that. So before we get into that, will you share a little bit of your story and what led you here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go back to my start of my career. I graduated as a chiropractor specializing in sports injuries and chronic musculoskeletal injuries, specifically repetitive strain type issues. And in 2004 is when I graduated. And in 2006, a couple of years into practice, I was asked to be on the news because my previous boss at the time had frozen on live television. So she was given the opportunity, passed the buck on to me. And that became, a really important turning point in my life because the story aired a few months later after they filmed. And as a result of that, we had a whole bunch of people calling our office. And none of them had elbow pain, which is what the story was about. Most of them, pretty much all of them, came in with some sort of chronic health issue. And in hindsight, it might be things like autoimmunity, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, maybe even mold toxicity. There was probably some Lyme people in there. And these were people that were just kind of bouncing around from doctor to doctor and really not knowing what to do. And somehow they landed in my office. So our practice overnight went from seeing some of the healthiest, weekend warriors in our town to some of the most unwell and unhealthiest people in our town and in our community. And it was quite shocking to me that nobody could help these people, but I also realized that I couldn't help them either. And sending them back to their medical doctor or their specialist wasn't an option because they'd already tried that. And so right around the same time, as luck would have it, I started receiving information from another doctor, Dr. Ron Grisanti, and he was sharing case studies of how he was helping people that I was essentially turning down. And he was located in South Carolina. And I'm like, wait a minute, he's a chiropractor and I'm a chiropractor in Ohio at this time. I'm wondering if I could do this. Turns out I could. So I became part of his first graduating class. And since then, I've never looked back. So functional medicine has been part of my DNA for quite some time. And, as with most things, the more you learn, the more complicated things can get.
Yeah.
And so I think we get to this point where we get overwhelmed with the complexity and we start asking ourselves, does it have to be this hard to get people well?
Right.
And so we started looking more towards lifestyle and first principles, and then looking at what can we do that would make getting healthy easy, affordable, teachable, and transferable as a skill, which we believe is really the only way to solve our healthcare crisis. It's not to wait until people get sick and then give them a holistic solution. It's to really teach them how to be healthy from the very beginning so that they can live their best possible life and teach that to their family members and leave a legacy of health behind. So that became the second half of my career, is seeking simplicity and trying to figure out how to help as many people as we can by focusing on doing the simple, most foundational things. And about 5 years ago, that's when I came across breathing. I went to a Wim Hof training. And during that training, I was able to hold my breath for about 3.5 minutes.
Wow.
Which was pretty amazing. And it was
right on your first try.
Well, not on my first try, but after the training itself. So
wow.
The first time. Yeah. And so we're all capable of that. Yeah, thank you. And most of us are capable of that. We just never have created the conditions to unlock that capability. So when you breathe in certain ways, you're able to, kind of really change the chemistry in your body that allows you to hold your breath that long. Wow. And so by the end of that training, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then fast forward about 1.5 years, my mentor, Giovanni, who also took me through the Wim Hof training, allowed me to join him in something called the elemental breathwork rhythm. And that's exactly what you experienced as well. Okay. And he just started teaching it. And I'm like, sign me up. So I was part of his first graduating class.
Nice.
And that started my facilitation journey. And then around the same time, my son, who's 13 now, he was going to the dentist, and the dentist remarked to him that, Mr. Devin is his name. Devin, Mr. Patel, we're going to have to, remove some of Devin's teeth. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So around that same time, another mentor came into my life, James Nestor. And so I read his book, Breath, and I realized in hindsight, really, that my son was a habitual mouth breather. And that's what caused his jaw to be small and narrow. And his hard palate was not well developed because he was not placing his tongue in the correct position. Right. So instead of having the teeth pulled, which multiple dentists had suggested, we ended up finding a dentist that would create a palatal expansion for him. And what I realized through that process as well is how important breathing is for our physical formation.
True.
So not just our physiology, not just our spirituality, but also our physicality is all impacted by the way we breathe. And simply by breathing correctly, it changes so many different aspects of our health. So my journey was a combination of my own self-exploration, helping others have, breakthroughs through their breathing and facilitating breath work for people, but then also something near and dear to me, which is my son, and taking him through the process of, naturally expanding his palate and helping him breathe correctly, preventing future kind of struggles and challenges, which can often be caused by dysfunctional breathing in childhood.
Absolutely. There's so much to unpack there. The first thing is, as a practitioner of Ayurvedic medicine, in Ayurveda, we talk to every client about, hey, there's yoga and there's pranayam. There's these entire ancient systems and modalities that exist that are showing us that just through breath work, we can have a lot of transformation, like you mentioned, even the spiritual, which I want to get into. And secondly, when it comes to our children, I had a similar experience. A lot of times nowadays you go through modern day dentistry and orthodontics, and they're like, okay, for your 8-year-old, let's do the expander, let's do the braces. Then again, they're 13, 14, 15, let's do it all again. And I'm like, why is it that we're spending this much and torturing the children this much over this topic? And I heard, I've not read the book yet, but I heard in the book Breath, he talks about how we no longer chew. We're just eating mushy food all day. We're not using our teeth the way we're meant to. And thus, we're not building our mouths and jaw lines properly. And I shared with you when we connected earlier, because of my own children and the way the orthodontist explained that they need to park their tongue at the top of their mouth, I became conscious about it. And I asked the orthodontist, I was like, are you crazy? What are you talking about? Parking your tongue up there? You're defying gravity. Like that can't even logically make sense. And she said, no. I invite you to YouTube it. Yes, it's true. And you shared that as well, that there's certain things we're supposed to do naturally that we may not even be aware of. And thus, at night or during the day, we might be doing things that are affecting our jawline. And from chiropractic and the different chiropractors I've gone to, I've learned our jaw translates to how we walk, how we move this earth. So will you share a little bit about how we're supposed to park our tongue in our mouth? And when it comes to sleep, how we're supposed to sleep so we're not all jamming our tongue against our teeth and or grinding. There's a lot there in terms of what we're doing at night and during the day and how it affects our physiology.
Yeah, great question. So if we kind of just study the anatomy for a moment, our face grows outwards, right? So as a child's head is growing and developing, it starts off small. It's the biggest part of us as a percentage of our body weight as when we're born. And then it expands outwards. And the tongue is responsible for preventing the hard palate from collapsing inwards and more importantly, pushing the palate outwards. So it acts as a spacer. What it also does is when our tongue is positioned correctly, where the tip of our tongue is behind our front two teeth, in the ridges that you'll feel there's a lot of nerve endings of the vagus nerve in that very location. So it actually acts as a relaxation point or a mudra, as you may know. And what that does is it basically stimulates our vagus nerve, puts us in a more relaxed state. This is why children will suck their thumb. This is why they'll use pacifiers. This is where a mother's nipple will press against the roof of their mouth and instantly soothe them because of the stimulation of the vagus nerve. So it instantly helps us relax. The other thing that it does is when our tongue is positioned at the roof of our mouth is it pushes our hard palate outwards and prevents it from caving in, so to speak. And the benefit of that is that the wider our upper palate is, the bigger our airway is. So when our airway is narrow, when our palate is narrow, our airway is narrow, and the volume of our sinuses is reduced, making it a little bit more challenging for people to breathe through their nose. And so they end up breathing through their mouth. And so simply by doing that, it makes a huge difference in a variety of different areas. So when we place our tongue correctly in the roof of our mouth, it almost forces us to breathe through our nose because when your tongue is positioned correctly, you can't breathe through your mouth. It relaxes your jaw because it's hard to clench your teeth when your tongue is in that position. It naturally kind of creates a gap in the back so you're not grinding your teeth. And when you breathe through your nose, it cleanses the air, purifies the air, moisture regulates the air, temperature regulates the air, filters the air, pressurizes the air. So we actually get more oxygen delivery to our alveoli, which are the little sacs in the bottom of our lungs. We get 20% more oxygen by simply breathing through our nose. The other thing that happens when we breathe through our nose is we have a 6-fold increase in nitric oxide production. And nitric oxide has many benefits. One is it's antiviral and antibacterial. So it sterilizes the air as it's coming into our lungs versus breathing through our mouth. Our mouth is the dirtiest part of our body. So imagine breathing through your mouth all day. You're breathing in particles and particulate of all that bacteria that's in your mouth that doesn't belong in your lungs.
Right.
When we increase nitric oxide, we also create vasodilation. So now we increase microcirculation to the brain, to the periphery, to our sexual organs. And then we also decrease blood pressure. So by simply breathing correctly, we cleanse the air, perfect it for the lungs. We decrease blood pressure naturally, and we increase circulation.
Nice.
And so the simple act of placing our tongue correctly at the roof of our mouth will change our anatomy, but it'll also change our physiology, and it'll support our immune system because our immune system actually starts in our nose. We breathe about 30 pounds of air a day. So if you think about that, there's more molecules of oxygen that we breathe per day than there are stars that we've identified in the universe.
Wow.
In fact, with every breath we take, there is more molecules of oxygen than there are grains of sand on the planet. So
Wow.
there's an entire universe of exchange that's taking place with each breath that we take. And so because we breathe 23,000 times a day and 30 liters a day, just by simply changing how we breathe and whether we breathe through our mouth or nose can have a profound impact on our health.
Just sitting here, I practiced what you said and it felt so good. Like all I did was put my tongue on the top of my mouth. And you're right, it really opens up your ability to breathe. And then you're like, well, if I can breathe more deeply, why wouldn't I? So you start taking these really long, relaxing breaths. And I felt my shoulders go down and my system settle. And instead of focusing so hard on like, what's your next awesome question? I was like, it'll come to you. It's fine. And I felt my whole system relax. And if you think about it, a lot of us are passively either consuming content, listening, walking, driving. We're not always engaging. So all those times we could reprogram ourselves to just utilize for this benefit for the system.
Yeah, it's a great point. So BJ Fogg, who I think you might know him as well, he wrote the book Tiny Habits. And in that book, he has basically a graph that shows people how to create change. And, change starts with tiny habits. And basically, you need to have motivation. So hopefully we can motivate people to understand the benefits of breathing correctly today. Yeah. You have to have the ability. We all have the ability to breathe better, which essentially is breathing slower, which we can get into. And then we need a prompt. So what I encourage people to do is find something that they think about often and connect their breath to it, or find something they do often and connect their breath to it. So the thing that most people think about the most as parents is probably our children. So every time you think of your child, think of where's my tongue. Every time you think of your phone, think where's my tongue. Every time you walk out of a room or into a room, ask yourself, where's my tongue? And by simply just changing the positioning of your tongue, it's like the lead domino where everything else naturally falls into place. Your breath will slow down, your nervous system will relax, you'll stop breathing through your mouth, your blood pressure will go down, your circulation will start to improve, the air that you're breathing, the quality of it will improve. So just by doing that one thing, 1,000 other processes in your body automatically get better and your body starts functioning in the state that you want it to be. One of the things that we want to remind people of is that we work with a lot of people who are metabolically challenged. And so metabolic challenges could include things like diabetes, difficult weight loss. It could include thyroid issues. It could include even autoimmune conditions. Thyroid being an autoimmune condition, Alzheimer's, right, is metabolic. Cancer is metabolic. And so one of the most important metabolic markers is the way we breathe. If you think about the relationship between how long you can go without something, there's like an inverse relationship between how long you can go without something and how important it is. So a lot of people change their diet, but you can go weeks without eating.
True.
Some people get more hydration. You can go days without drinking water. I don't recommend any of this.
Yeah.
Some people, focus on sleep. You can go a couple days without sleeping, but you can't go more than 5 minutes without breathing.
Right.
So what if we started there? Right. And what's interesting about breathing is that it produces a measurable effect. So objectively, we can measure changes within minutes in people's physiology and biology. And there's a subjective improvement as well. Just like you said, by simply changing the position of your tongue, within seconds, you started to feel some sort of relief or some sort of, stress leaving your body.
True.
And it's one of those rare things that we can actually do. And one of the best metrics of our metabolic health is how efficiently we utilize oxygen in our mitochondria. The only place we use oxygen in our entire biology and in our entire body is in our mitochondria. Right. 10% of our body weight is mitochondria. And so if we just started to realize that breathing is what fuels the mitochondria, right, and how important it is, we would start to realize that this is one of those very overlooked modalities. Our mitochondria can only live 5 seconds without oxygen. So that tells you how significant it is that we continue breathing and making sure that we're getting that delivery to the cells and into the mitochondria.
It's tremendous. And let's keep going there for a moment, because some people are easy to convince. They're like, You tell me it's healthy for me, I'll do it. But what I find is with some personalities, you need to see the punishment really clearly. You need to see, like, if I don't do this, what again doesn't happen for me? And I noticed just in this last few years post-pandemic that for me, and I discussed this with you, I have super hearing abilities. I'm like Wonder Woman. Someone drops a pin in a corner of my home or in my vicinity, in the back of my car, you rustle paper. I'm like, oh my gosh, as if it's next to me. And so I went to ENT and I said, hey, I have super hearing abilities, which makes me a not so sweet mom. But because by about 8 o'clock at night, I just wish I had a separate house that was silent. I can't take it that no one will just, I should probably just wear noise canceling headphones at this point. And so I went just to get assessed. And he said, well, the thing is you are within the range of normal, on the very top of the range, but you're grinding your teeth at night. You're doing things at night that aren't good for you. And so when it comes to sleep, I talk so much about sleep, circadian rhythm, Ayurveda's circadian clock. And I know that when we sleep, we're supposed to get this phenomenal sleep. Sleep is when we're going to clear inflammation, when we're going to clear the lymphatic system, all those things. So will you speak a little bit about the importance of breath and sleep as one of those key points as to why we need to focus on this, potentially do mouth taping the way you explain it and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that many people, maybe they realize this, maybe they don't, is that the most parasympathetic thing that we do is sleep. So every goal that somebody has when it comes to their health, whether it's better immune function, lower blood pressure, more blood flow to the brain, better sexual health, better digestion, better immunity, better blood sugar balancing and regulation, better kidney function, better detox. Every single reason that people go see a functional medicine practitioner or even the regular doctor, that physiology lives on the side of the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. And so breath is actually the bridge between the sympathetic and parasympathetic system, because we can actually consciously control through the positioning of our tongue, through the depth and pace of our breath, what state our nervous system should be in. And so sleep, because it's the most parasympathetic thing that we do, that's when we should be breathing parasympathetic as well. And so that's when the pace of our breath, the positioning of our tongue matters even more. About 66% of people sleep with their mouth open.
Wow.
So statistically, they're breathing in a fight or flight state. They're not activating their vagus nerve. They wake up more tired than when they went to bed. And guess what? When they're in that state of dysfunctional breathing while they sleep, their body's producing more cortisol than it should be, instead of putting them in a relaxed state where they're now activating the healing mechanism of the vagus nerve. So we pay really close attention, not to just how people breathe when they're doing breathing exercises or having breathing experiences. Wim Hof has done a great job at, giving us opportunities like to do 10-minute breathing sessions, and then, having these out of body type of experiences. And what I like to focus on is the other 99% of the time, how people breathe.
Absolutely.
And if I had to double down on when the most important focus is on our breath, is actually when we're unconscious and when we're sleeping.
Got it.
So most people don't know this. They don't realize that they snore. They don't realize that they sleep with their mouth open. And even if they sleep with their mouth open and they don't snore, it's still a dysfunctional form of breathing, because they're essentially destroying their oral microbiome. They're predisposing themselves to increased blood pressure, right? So there's a whole host of other things that we talked about that are caused by dysfunctional mouth breathing.
Can I pause right there? We are damaging our oral microbiome, which is the beginning of our entire gut microbiome. So we could be taking all sorts of beautifully awesome probiotics, but because we're opening our mouths when we sleep, which we don't even know about, we're not winning at gut health.
Yeah. I mean, your gut starts in your mouth, right? And so the interesting thing about the oral microbiome is that, and really the oral, your mouth in general, I work with a lot of dentists, and especially airway dentists. And, one of the things that I learn from them and they learn from me is how important breathing mechanics are. And so when we breathe through our mouth, we dry out the saliva. So not only are we signaling our body that we're in fight or flight, but we dry out the saliva, and that saliva helps us produce nitric oxide. So mouth breathers tend to make less nitric oxide. People who use mouthwash make almost no nitric oxide because they wipe out the beneficial bacteria.
Right.
And our saliva has a protective mechanism. It actually protects our teeth. So believe it or not, I was shocked by this. The number one cause of cavities is actually mouth breathing.
Wow.
And I know this firsthand because the first time we went to the dentist with my son, we were so sure he was going to get a clean bill of health.
Yeah.
And the dentist comes to us and says, Mr. Patel, we have good news and bad news. I said, well, what's the bad news? And they're like, your son has a ton of cavities.
Right.
I said, well, what's the good news? And they said, well, they're all in his baby teeth. So we don't have to do anything about it. They're all going to fall out. No big deal. And we were just like, kind of like scratching our heads. Like he doesn't eat junk. Like he eats healthy, whole food. Like what the heck's going on? And the dentist didn't tell us he was a mouth breather. It just, as hindsight, we learned that. And that's why I'm so adamant. I know I'm talking about my son a lot because people who are listening to this might have young children. Yeah. And, I want them to really pay attention to how their children breathe because it changes their behavior, just like it does for an adult. So about 30% of, behavioral disorders in children are actually caused by dysfunctional breathing.
Wow. That's
changes their facial structure, changes their oral microbiome, which then makes them more prone to cavities. And who wants to get drilled for cavities, right? Yeah. Even if you're putting natural porcelain fillers in there, nobody wants that.
No.
And it also can cause a whole host of other issues like tonsils and adenoids having to be removed. And then later on in life, it can cause anxiety for people, chronic low-grade anxiety because they're chronic habitual mouth breathers. Wow. It can also cause them to be snorers, right? Which makes them maybe not the most pleasant person to sleep next to, but also they're not going to be the best version of themselves when they wake up in the morning. So I used to snore and I didn't realize how bad my snoring was. My wife would nudge me periodically and she's like, you're snoring. I'm like, I'm not even asleep. How could I be snoring? Yeah. And then she'd be like, no, trust me, you're snoring. So then I got an app. It's called Snore Lab. And there's a bunch of different apps out there, but I use Snore Lab. And you can actually record yourself while you're sleeping. So you get a sense of what your snore score is in the morning because the app records you all night. Oh, wow. And then you can introduce different types of behaviors to reduce or eliminate snoring altogether. And one of them is mouth taping. So it sounds kind of weird and strange when you first think about it or when somebody first mentions it. And there's like this whole social craze about mouth taping. Yeah. Now, what I encourage people to do is just get some 3M micropore tape. It's like $3-4 for a roll of it. It'll last you a couple of months. And you just need to put it vertically like this. So you don't need to seal your mouth because the purpose of the tape isn't to seal your mouth. The purpose of the tape is to keep your mouth closed. Right. And so you can still talk with the tape on. You can still drink through a straw if you need to with the tape on. And you will find, and anyone who does this will find a remarkable difference within just a couple of days in their energy when they wake up in the morning. I had a lady message me and she just saw one of my videos and said, within 2 days, the chronic headaches I have are gone. The chronic fatigue I was experiencing is gone. And now I'm waking up in the morning ready to exercise just by taping her mouth closed. Had she come to me 5-10 years ago, I would have probably ran a whole bunch of labs on her. I would have run all kinds of testing on her, maybe given her all kinds of supplements to try to help her have more energy and support her mitochondria. But it was just dysfunctional breathing. So that's like a very huge hidden opportunity for a lot of people, how they breathe when they sleep, because they don't hear themselves breathing when they sleep. If they don't have a partner, their partner may not know. Or be able to, obviously, if they don't have a partner, there's no one to tell them that they're snoring. Right. And oftentimes it just leads to a lot of health issues. People who wake up with high blood sugar, right? You might wonder, how the heck can I have high blood sugar? I haven't eaten anything for 10 hours. Right. It's actually caused by dysfunctional breathing. Wow. So when we have people tape their mouth shut, their blood sugars start to normalize because, the main function of cortisol in our body is to raise blood sugar. And so if you're breathing in a way that's informing your nervous system that you're either dying or you're gasping for air at night, or you're breathing through your mouth, which is a fight or flight breathing posture, then you're just telling your body that we can't relax. We need to be, hypervigilant right now, make more cortisol. Right. Another interesting thing about taping your mouth at night, or, and if you're not a mouth breather, then you don't have to tape your mouth. I get that. But for me, it's an insurance policy, and it's like pennies a day, right? It's one of the cheapest health interventions and guarantees that you're going to get a good night's rest, or at least more likely to. One of the things my clients love is that they stop waking up in the middle of the night to use a bathroom.
That's a big one.
And that's a huge one for a lot of people because it disrupts their sleep or their partner's sleep, because breathing through your mouth is actually a diuretic, whereas breathing through your nose is an antidiuretic, which means that we're able to regulate our body temperature better breathing through our nose, and our fluid retention breathing through our nose as well. So just that one thing, and people tell me, listen, if I had to go back, and they don't even complain about this problem because they don't even know there's a solution for it, right? They don't tell me, my biggest problem is I wake up in the middle of the night. But until you solve that problem for them, within the first few days of working with them, they're just like absolutely blown away of like, wow, like I didn't even know that I could fix this. I just thought I had to drink less water, or I thought I had to, avoid all beverages for like hours and hours. And even when they did that, they would still have to wake up in the middle of the night because of their dysfunctional breathing.
Sure. And what you just said is so powerful. Imagine if all day, like I find myself and all the women around me are like, I never hydrate enough. I never hydrate enough. So I have started drinking through all my interviews just because I end up so thirsty that by about 3-4 o'clock, the headaches start every day. And it's because I either forgot I didn't have time for lunch, which is a habit I'm working on right now, is blocking lunch on the calendar, or I just don't hydrate. But what if you're a mouth breather, and thus you are in a diuretic state throughout your day and throughout the night. So you're just always behind the wheel. You're never able to catch up and just be hydrated and settled. You're constantly just peeing everything out and then wondering, why do I feel this way? When you're breathing.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. So it reminded me to share this, that we recapture moisture when we breathe through our nose, which we don't recapture when we breathe through our mouth. So there's about a 40% recapture of moisture when we breathe through our nose. So we're actually able to recirculate that fluid versus breathing through our mouth. We dissipate that fluid. And so, that in and of itself can make a big difference for people. So yeah. And, of course, adding salt to the water, I think is very important. It just helps drive the fluids and especially the water into the cells. So we actually stay more hydrated, right? Hydration is, as you probably know, and maybe the listeners would want to know this, is that hydration is more about electrolyte balance than it is about the amount of water that we consume. And certainly we don't want to lose water because of dysfunctional breathing either.
Absolutely. So will you walk us through, let's say everyone today is listening to this and they're about to jump in the car and they've got like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Cause I don't know about where you live, but where I live in South Florida, we're in our cars a lot. Like it's an hour just round trip to school. It's an hour to go do anything else. It's probably why Zoom is the best thing ever, because we can do so much more in our days. But will you walk us through that breathing technique? Is it as simple as just bring the tongue to the exact spot you're talking about right behind your teeth? And then what are your steps you typically explain after that?
Yeah, great question. So there's people always ask me, what's the right way to breathe? Yeah. And, it's a loaded question because every circumstance may require a slightly different breath. Okay. So I breathe differently when I'm, reading. I breathe differently when I'm going for a walk. I breathe differently when I'm lifting weights. I breathe differently when I'm trying to put myself to bed at night, right? So there's a guide I created, and I'm happy to share it with the audience. It's called Breathe Like This, Not That. Okay. And so it's basically outlines the different breathing modalities and techniques based on what your goal is. So our nervous system is quite interesting. It actually, one of the first things to change in our physiology when we experience any shift in our nervous system is our breath. So for example, if a lion were to walk into your office, the first thing you would do is gasp. Right? Because what gasping does is it hyperinflates the lungs, which squeezes the heart, increases the ejection fraction and blood pressure to get blood to your arms and legs. And then you would start breathing really heavily because the lungs and the diaphragm would start assisting the heart in pumping blood to your arms and legs and increasing blood pressure. If we feel a sense of relief, we sigh. Right? So our nervous system, to our unconscious, to our subconscious awareness, is using our breath constantly to change our physicality, to change our chemistry, and then also to regulate our emotions. So depending on how we want to feel, we can use different breathing techniques. The breathing technique that I encourage most people to breathe with is called coherence breathing. And it's really simple. We slow down our breath to a 6-second inhale and a 6-second exhale.
Okay.
So it would be tongue at the roof of the mouth, breathing in through our nose for a count of 6, and breathing out for a count of 6. And you do that for a couple of minutes, not even if you do that just for a minute, you're instantly going to feel a sense of relaxation. What's really fascinating, Shivani, is that the average person takes about, let's call it 15 to 20 breaths per minute.
Okay.
And we burn about 1,200 calories a day by simply breathing. Okay. And so when we work with clients for their metabolic health, we reduce their calorie intake because we want to induce something called autophagy, right? And when we induce autophagy, we're killing off zombie cells that are senescent, no longer serving us anymore. And we also want to help reduce inflammation and narrow their feeding window. Now, if they keep breathing the same way, burning 1,200 calories by simply just breathing, then reducing their calorie intake will make them catabolic.
Right.
But if they now start breathing, let's call it 1/3 less, they're consuming 400 less calories. So now they can literally eat one less meal without going into a catabolic state by slowing down their breathing. So just like most people overeat, we overconsume calories, most people overbreathe.
Interesting.
So the secret to being healthier is not breathing more. That's what people think. They need to take deeper breaths. They need to breathe more. They actually need to breathe less. So it's very paradoxical. But when we slow down our breath, we actually increase the concentration of CO2. And when we increase CO2 concentration, we actually dump more oxygen at the tissue level. So it's actually called the Bohr effect. And it's an interesting phenomenon. So with each breath we take, we only consume about 20% of the oxygen that we breathe. The other 80% we breathe right back out. So each breath that we take, there's actually 5 additional breaths in that breath if we were to utilize all the oxygen. Okay. So what happens is, and that's, you want that, right? Because if somebody stops breathing, right, we don't want them, if they consume all that oxygen in that first breath, there's nothing really left for them. But what happens in our body is that as we stop breathing, the oxygen that's circulating in our on our red blood cells is now paying attention to the concentration of carbon dioxide. And as carbon dioxide concentrations increase, our red blood cells actually dump more oxygen to the tissue. And remember, our mitochondria die after 5 seconds,
right,
without oxygen, right? So we keep dumping more and more and more oxygen as our CO2 levels increase. So the urge to breathe actually isn't because we need more oxygen. The urge to breathe is because we want to eliminate CO2. So when we start breathing slower, we increase our tolerance levels of CO2. And by increasing our tolerance levels of CO2, we actually, A, calm our body down, B, we actually get more oxygen delivery to our tissue. And we also calm our nervous system down. And so what's another interesting thing is I have a great graph that I show people is that the less an animal breathes, the longer it lives. So a turtle, for example, takes about 4 breaths per minute, live to 150 to 200 years. A dog takes about 35 breaths a minute and ages about 7 times faster than a human does. So the fastest way to slow down the aging process is actually to slow down your breath.
Wow.
And
instead of creams and products and all the longevity stuff we buy all day and spend money on.
And it's so ironic because it's so free and it's so instantaneous, right? Yeah. And the Framingham study found that the greatest predictor of lifespan is actually lung capacity. So making sure you have good lung capacity and making sure you have high CO2 tolerance are essential. So going back to your original question, how should I be breathing most of the day, right? So when you're on Zoom calls, when you're driving, when you're listening to music, reading a book, your baseline breath should be 6 in, 6 out. And studies have shown, James Nestor talks about this in his book, is that many prayers are actually set to this cadence.
Wow.
And what they found is that it puts people into a relaxed state. Yeah. And it also increases oxygenation of the brain. So if you want more oxygen going to your brain, which, who doesn't want that? Who doesn't need that these days?
Seriously.
Then that 6 in, 6 out coherence breath is like the baseline breath. So that's how I encourage people to breathe like 91% of the time. When I'm going for a walk, which I encourage everyone to do within the first hour of the day, what I do is I do a 6-step, I call it a 6-stepper. So I breathe in for a count of 6 steps, and I breathe out for 6 steps. Breathe in for 6 steps, breathe out for 6 steps. So you'll see that it's easier said than done, because as you start picking up the pace, that exhale becomes a little bit more challenging, but that increases our tolerance to CO2. And if you were to wear a pulse oximeter, you would see that your blood oxygen level doesn't drop. Okay. So even though it might become challenging to do it, you'll see that your blood oxygen levels don't change. The other recommendation for people is the 3 gears of breathing. Okay. So gear number 1 is in and out through the nose, right? So that's how I breathe literally 99% of the time. If we start exerting ourselves and we really need to move that CO2 out, then breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth, in through the nose, out through the mouth. And then if we need to go in an all-out sprint, right? Remember, our breath can assist our physical body.
Right.
So if I'm going in an all-out sprint and I want to rapidly increase blood pressure and get blood flowing to my arms and legs so I can run away from something that's chasing me or do a sprint, then I would breathe in and out through my mouth rapidly. And that's short-term breathing, right? So we wouldn't be breathing like that all day. But for a sprint for like 30 seconds, for example, and then we would gear down. So then we would catch our breath, start breathing in through our nose, out through our mouth, and then go back to breathing in and out through our nose. So those are the different gears of breathing that I like to recommend to people as well.
2 things there. One, I've tried this breathing while you were speaking, and it was hard. Like to actually go in for 6, right when you initially said it, made it hard to focus. So I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm in the middle of a podcast. I need to be focused. I'm the host. So I was like, let's bring that back to 4. So it's interesting. It's actually going to be a practice to get to 6-6, which I would never have assumed it would even take any practice to hold for 6. If you do yoga or anything, you're doing this kind of breath. So that was an interesting note. And then secondly, when you talked about longevity and breath and lung capacity, does that also mean that we need to, like, sometimes I think if you're going to only lift and walk, do you need to still do HIIT training or cardio training to keep that ability to run, jog, and those things as we age, or does it not matter as much? And I know that's cardiovascular health, but does that also apply to how many breaths? Because it's almost like you're implying, don't breathe 50 million breaths if you don't have to. Slow them down. That is your investment in longevity. So so we want to, like, so when we lose our breath, that's a form of hormesis, right? So it's a controlled stressor. Like exercise is a controlled stressor. We wouldn't want to breathe like that all day, but we do want to push our body to its proverbial limits. Right. So what I encourage people to do is lose your breath every day. Whether it's playing basketball, whether it's doing some heavy lifting, whether it's doing some sprints, maybe it's cleaning up around the house or doing a HIIT training, like lose your breath every day so that you could, kind of get out of your breathing comfort zone, so to speak, and then bring your body back to that baseline breathing. What I also encourage people to do are diaphragmatic exercises. So your diaphragm is actually one of your most important muscles that very rarely gets any light of day, right? And literally we don't see it. True. So it doesn't really get a lot of attention, but it's probably the most important muscle in your body. Wow. Your diaphragm is the only muscle that we have conscious control over that is working 24/7. Every other muscle shuts off when you're breathing, except when you're sleeping, except your diaphragm. Wow. Your diaphragm is responsible for pumping 3 crucial systems in our body. One is the diaphragm is referred to as a second heart. So it's responsible for assisting the heart in pumping blood. In fact, about 40% of our blood pressure that the heart produces is actually coming from the diaphragm and the lungs. So every time we breathe in and out, our lungs squeeze our heart. And as our diaphragm moves up and down, it also assists the heart in pumping blood. Okay. Got it. The next pump that the diaphragm is responsible for is the lymphatic pump. So some of the biggest lymph nodes in our body are underneath our diaphragm. Right. And so if you think about our trunk organs, the lymph is our sewage system for those people that are new to that term. Every day we make about 12 liters of lymph.
And so we only have about 5 liters of blood, but we make 12 liters of waste product every day that has to be recirculated and purified and eliminated from the body when necessary. And so our muscles in our arms and legs pump lymph, to our trunk. However, our organs aren't wrapped individually with muscle tissue. What they are essentially, what they require is the piston-like action of the diaphragm to pump the lymph in and out. Okay. So the second pump is that our diaphragm pumps lymph. And then the third pump, and this is one that a lot of people don't realize is very crucially important, is our hydrostatic myofascial matrix. So our myofascial matrix is basically a web-like structure. It was recently discovered in the last 20 years. And we used to cut through it in anatomy class. It would be like this spider webbing type of structure. However, your myofascial matrix connects everything to everything. It's like the web of life in your body. Your matrix connects all your tissues, organs, systems, and cells together. In fact, the matrix connects to the nucleus of every cell in your entire body. And it's a hydrostatic system, which means it maintains constant pressure within it. And so pressures are transferred when we walk, when we experience injuries, and our diaphragm is what pumps this entire matrix. So diaphragm pumps our cardiovascular system and heart, our circulatory system, pumps our lymphatic system, and maintains the pressure of our hydrostatic myofascial matrix.
And we don't use our diaphragm enough.
Most people don't. Most people don't even know what the diaphragm is, right?
Yeah.
So they don't understand the importance of it. It also acts as a stabilizer muscle as well. But the diaphragm, a lot of times for many people, the diaphragm range of motion can be very restricted, right? Because they might have trigger points in the diaphragm, or they might have excessive visceral fat, which makes it difficult for them to take their diaphragm through its full range of motion. So we do diaphragmatic exercises. We encourage people to do some trigger point work on their diaphragm. And then we can do strengthening exercises for the diaphragm. And it's really simple. I mean, most of what I'm sharing today is embarrassingly simple to do.
Yeah.
And one of the easiest ways to strengthen the diaphragm is to lay on your stomach and breathe into your belly. And so just the resistance of your body weight will create resistance for the diaphragm, and that'll strengthen it. The other way is if somebody has a hard time laying on their stomach due to their back issue, or maybe their body composition doesn't allow that, then just lay on your back. You can bend your knees if you want to, and put some textbooks on your stomach and breathe into your belly, raising those textbooks up and down, and that will strengthen the diaphragm as well.
It's like weightlifting for the diaphragm.
There you go.
It's so interesting. So what you're saying is, if we do the work to build a stronger diaphragm, we're thus going to impact cardiovascular, lymphatic, of course, it makes so much sense, and our own myofascial interconnectedness, strength, detox, all those things will be impacted. And is the reason we have these untrained, unutilized, or underutilized even diaphragms is because we have just come out of the practice of doing proper deep breathing throughout our day. We're just breathing through our mouth, not paying attention, and we've just bypassed using it.
It's a combination of things. In my opinion, we've never been taught this, right? Like I was 15 years into practice until I even learned about breathing. And even now, when I speak to practitioners, like I don't see this in the curriculum anywhere, right? In naturopathic school, chiropractic school, in medical school, nobody's really, pointing out some of these things that to me are so obvious, right? And once you see it, you can't unsee it.
True.
And, if anyone wants to be even just an ounce healthier, right? They're willing to do all these other things, right? That may or may not work. But there's literally thousands of research articles on how breathing impacts our health.
Right. And
it's so simple.
Yeah, it's simple. We're not asking you to go keto. We're not asking you to cook everything organic and fresh from a farm in your backyard. It's actually one of the simpler ones, which I like. I think sometimes we overcomplicate health. And, what you have me thinking about is in Ayurveda is a sister science to yoga. Within Ayurveda, like I said at the beginning, we teach pranayama, but I always think of pranayama as an active breathing technique that you're going to go do so that you can meditate or so that you are doing it in the beginning, middle, or end of your yoga practice. I don't think of it as something you bring into your day all day. And so maybe that's the fallacy, is so many of the things that we think of for our health, we're just assuming that we're going to get to doing them. While what you're saying is, if I can just show you how 99% of the time, 95 to 99%, you can breathe this way, then you can reach that level of health and vitality and balance that we want in the body.
Yeah. And, the breath is like the steering wheel of our nervous system. And our nervous system is the master regulator of all of our function. And so when people come to me, they tell me they want all of these goals. They want all of these. They want to have normal blood pressure. They want to have normal blood sugar. They want to sleep better. They want to feel more calm. They want to feel more present. Well, those are all parasympathetic. All of those things live on the parasympathetic side of the fence.
Right.
And the fastest way to get there is to change your breath. Right. So if you said, Sachin, here's $1 million, what's the fastest way for me to shift from fight or flight to, rest and digest and relax and repair, rejuvenate? I would change the way you breathe. I wouldn't go find some sort of fancy machine or a drug or even a supplement. I would just change your breath. And 100 times out of 100, it would work in every single person. And because we already breathe, I'm not telling anyone to take any time out of their day. Right? Certainly they can. If they want to go a little bit deeper, they can do that. But you're already doing it 23,000 times a day. What if we just raised consciousness for half of those breaths?
Right.
And pranayama, like the word prana is life force and yama is control, right? So we have the ability to control our breath in any given moment, in any given situation.
True.
And what's also interesting about how we breathe, because it regulates our nervous system, it also allows us to hold space for other people. So when there's safety in our breath, right, we exude safety and provide a comfortable space for other people. If I'm sitting next to you and I'm like, you're not going to feel very safe around me, right? But if I'm breathing nice and calm, right, then I'm going to confer that and transfer that safety to you. And so I like to speak in extremes because it just becomes very illustrative. Right. So if you were running away from something, how would you be breathing? Breathing with your mouth open, tongue hanging out of your mouth, probably, right? Trying to breathe as much as you can, right? To pump that blood through your body. So what's the opposite of that? Tongue at the roof of the mouth, breathing nice and slow, right? Absolutely. In a slow rhythmic fashion. So there's ways that we can, just using, the bookends of extremity of these extremes and understand, well, this is how I'd be breathing if I was in fight or flight. So what's the exact opposite of that? Maybe I should breathe that way if I want to feel the exact opposite and feel nice and calm.
Absolutely. Sachin, I feel like we need a part 2 because there's so much to talk to you about. I follow you online and I encourage everyone to follow Sachin online. I love his content. I love what he shares. And that's rare. Like I follow a lot of people online, but someone whose content I actually enjoy every single day is yours. And I love the way that you break down the wisdom that you share. It's unusual that someone can be such a fantastic teacher who conveys the information in a way that we can absorb, but also makes it, you have such a pureness about it. You don't make anyone feel bad about what they're doing already. You very much break it down into, this is wisdom. I'm just here to share it. And I'm just here to show you the science behind it and how you can apply it. So before we wrap up today, I encourage everyone to practice the breathing technique that Sachin shared with you. Reach out to him and let him know what it does for you, because I know I'm going to be practicing it starting now today. But will you share how people can find you and get that guide that you spoke about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, they say the best things in life are free. So I've created a series of resources and tools for people. And I call it the Ultimate Breathwork Bundle. And in there, I share a keynote presentation that I did for a group of dentists that got a standing ovation. So happy to share that. And then I also share the slides. So you can request the slides through the email that I send. I also share my notes from my James Nestor retreat that I went to. I share a stop snoring guide to teach people exercises that they can do and practices to eliminate snoring, which I've done for myself and many other people. I also share that guide, Breathe Like This, Not That. So you know how to breathe in various circumstances and situations. And I also have a fully guided breathwork experience. So much like what you experienced when we were together at CHS, I have a recorded version of that. And it's fully guided. Just put on your headphones or put it on a speaker and take a group of your friends on the journey with you and do the integration afterwards as a group. And that's all available for free at breathworkwithsachin.com.
Awesome. That's amazing. I can't wait to do that. That was such a beautiful experience.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sachin, for coming onto the podcast today. I really appreciate it. And I know one day we're going to do a part 2 because there's so much more to share. But this was such a great deep dive into breath, sleep, simple tactics we can use. I'm going to try mouth taping. I know for a fact that it's going to be transformational for me and give me more energy when I wake up. And I'm obsessed with sleep and the impact it has on our health. So thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my absolute honor. Thank you for hosting me, and thank you for the wonderful questions.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me for this episode. Check out our sponsor, Fusionary Formulas, the potent turmeric supplement used by doctors around the U.S. for patients with pain and inflammation. www.fusionaryformulas.com. I'm your host, Dr. Shivani Gupta. For more, visit shivanigupta.com. Subscribe to this podcast in Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Click the follow button or subscribe in any of the apps that you use. That's all I've got for you on the Fusionary Health podcast this week. You have the power to transform your health and achieve vibrant health starting today.